Hello, room 203. I wanted to read another chapter from Matilda. It's called The Practice. I think I'll just read one chapter. They're kind of long chapters, and there is only 2 chapters total left, so I'm going to read one of the 2. The Practice. Matilda found the house empty as usual. Her father was not yet back from work. Her mother was not yet back from bingo, and her brother might be anywhere. She went straight into the living room and opened the drawer of the sideboard where she knew her father kept a box of cigars. She took one out and carried it up to her bedroom and shut herself in. Now, for the practice, she told herself. It's going to be tough, but I'm determined to do it. Her plan for helping Miss Honey was beginning to form beautifully in her mind. She had it now in almost every detail, but in the end, it all depended upon her being able to do one very special thing with her eye power. But she felt fairly confident that with a great deal of practice and effort, she would succeed in the end. The cigar was essential. It was perhaps a bit thicker than she would have liked, but the weight was about right. It would be fine for practicing with. There was a small dressing table in Matilda's bedroom with her hairbrush and comb on it, and 2 library books. She cleared these things away and laid the cigar down in the middle of the dressing table. And then she walked away and sat on the end of her bed. She was now about 10 feet away from the cigar. She settled herself and began to concentrate. And very quickly this time she felt the electricity beginning to flow inside of her head, gathering itself behind the eyes, and the eyes became hot. And millions of tiny invisible hands began pushing out like sparks toward the cigar. Move, she whispered, and to her intense surprise, almost at once the cigar, with its little red and gold paper band around the middle, rolled away across the top of the dressing table and fell onto the carpet. And there's a picture. Matilda had enjoyed that. It was lovely doing it. It felt as though sparks were going around and round inside of her head and flashing out of her eyes. It had given her a sense of power that was almost ethereal. And how quick it had been this time. How simple. She crossed the bedroom, picked up the cigar, and put it back on the table. Now for the difficult one, she thought, but if I have the power to push, then surely I also have the power to lift. It's vital I learn how to lift it. I must learn how to lift it right into the air and keep it there. It is not a very heavy thing, a cigar. She sat on the end of the bed and started again. It was now easy to summon up the power behind her eyes. It was like pushing a trigger in the brain. Lift, she whispered, lift, lift. And there's Matilda sitting on her bed. At first, the cigar started to roll away, but then with Matilda concentrating very fiercely, one end of it slowly lifted an inch off the tabletop, and with a colossal effort, she managed to hold it there about 10 seconds, and it fell back again. Whew, she gasped. I'm getting it. I'm starting to do it. For the next hour, Matilda kept practicing, and in the end, she managed by the sheer power of her eyes to lift the whole cigar clear off the table, about 6 inches into the air, and hold it there about a minute. And then suddenly she was so exhausted she fell back on the bed and went to sleep. And that's how her mother found her later in the evening. A couple pictures of her concentrating. What's the matter with you? Her mother said, waking her up. And are you ill? Oh gosh, Matilda said, sitting up and looking around. No, I'm all right. I was a bit tired, that's all. From then on, every day after school, Matilda shut herself in her room and practiced with the cigar. As soon as it all began to come together in a most wonderful way, 6 days later, by the following Wednesday evening, she was able not only to lift the cigar up into the air, but also to move it around exactly as she wished. It was beautiful. I can do it, she cried. I can really do it. I can pick the cigar up with my eye power, and I can push it and pull it into the air the way I want. All she had to do now was to put her great plan into action. The third miracle. The next day was Thursday, and that, as the whole of Miss Honey's class knew, was the day on which the headmistress would take charge of the first lesson after lunch. In the morning, Miss Honey said to them, 1 or 2 of you did not particularly enjoy the last occasion when headmistress took the class. So let's try to be especially careful and clever today. How are your ears, Eric, after your last encounter with Miss Trunchbull? She stretched them. My mother said she's positive they're bigger than they were, Eric said. And Rupert, I'm glad to see you didn't lose any of your hair after last Thursday. My head was jolly sore afterward, Rupert said. And you, Nigel, Miss Honey said, do please try not to smart aleck with that headmistress. You're really quite cheeky. in her doing that to her last week? I hate her, Nigel said. Try not to make it so obvious, Miss Honey said. It doesn't pay. She's a very strong woman, and she has muscles like steel ropes. I wish I was grown up, Nigel said. I'd knock her flat. I doubt she could, Miss Honey said. No one has got the better of her yet. No one. That will be the testing for us this afternoon, the small girl asked. Almost certainly 3 times table, said Miss Honey, and that's what you're all meant to have learnt this past week. Make sure you know it. After lunch came and went, the class reassembled, and Miss Honey stood at one side of the room, and they all sat silent, apprehensive, and waiting. And then, like some giant of doom, the enormous Trunchbull strode into the room in her green breeches and cotton smock, and she went straight to her jug of water, lifted it by the handle, and peered inside. Well, I'm glad to see, she said, there are no slimy creatures in my drinking water this time. If there had been, then something exceptionally unpleasant would have happened to every single member of this class, and that includes you, Miss Honey. The class remained silent and very tense. They had learned a bit about this tigress by now, and nobody was about to take any chances. Very well, boomed Trunchbull. Let us see how well you know your 3 times table. Or put it in another way, let's see how badly Miss Honey has taught you the 3 times table. The Trunchbull was standing in front of the class, legs apart, hands on her hips, scowling at Miss Honey, who was silent on one side. Matilda, sitting motionless on her desk in the second row, was watching things very closely. You, the Trunchbull shouted, pointing a finger the size of a rolling pin at a boy called Wilford. Wilford was on the extreme right of the front row. Stand up, you! Wilford stood up. Recite the 3 times tables backwards, Trunchbull barked. Backwards, stammered Wilford. But I haven't learned it backwards. There you are. She taught you nothing, Miss Honey. Why, have you not taught them absolutely nothing all this whole week? That's not true, headmistress. They've all learned the 3 times table, but I see no point in teaching it backwards. There is a little point in teaching anything backwards, is there? The whole object of life, headmistress, is to go forwards. I ventured to ask whether the whole object of life is to go forward, and I venture to ask whether even you, for example, can spell a simple word like wrong backwards right away. I very much doubt it. Don't you get impertinent with me, Miss Honey, Trunchbull snapped, and then she turned back to the unfortunate Wilfred. Very well, boy, answer me this. I have 7 apples, 7 oranges, and 7 bananas. How many pieces of fruit do I have altogether? Hurry up now. Get on with it. Give me that answer. Well, that's adding up. That isn't 3 times tables. You blithering idiot, shouted Trunchbull. You festering gumboil. You flea-bitten fungus. That is the 3 times table. You have 3 separate lots of fruit, and each has 7 pieces. 3 times 7 is 21. Can't you see that, you stagnant cesspool? I'll give you one more chance. I have 8 coconuts, 8 monkey nuts, and 8 nutty little idiots like you. How many nuts do I have altogether? Answer me quickly. Poor Wilfred was properly flustered. Wait, please wait. I gotta add up 8 coconuts and 8 monkey nuts. He started counting on his fingers. You blustering blister, you mouth-eating maggot, Trunchbull yelled. This is not adding up. It's multiplication. The answer is 3 8s, or 8 3s. What's the difference between 3 8s and 8 3s? Tell me that. You mangled little wurzel. Look sharp about it. By now, Wilfred was too far frightened and bewildered even to speak. In 2 strides, Trunchbull was beside him, and by some amazing gymnastics trick, may have been judo, karate, she flipped the back of Wilfred's legs with one of her feet so that the boy shot up in the ground and turned a somersault in the air. But halfway through the somersault, she caught him by the ankle, and guess what? She was holding him dangling upside down like a plucked chicken in a shopping window. 8 3s, a Trunchbull shouted, swinging Wilfred from side to side by ankle. 8 3s is the same as 3 8s, and 3 8s are 24. Repeat it. Oh, boy. At exactly that moment, Nigel on the other side of the room jumped to his feet and started pointing excitedly at the blackboard and screamed, the chalk, look at the chalk, it's moving on its own. So hysterical and shrill was Nigel's scream that everyone in the room, including the Trunchbull, looked up at the blackboard, and there enough, a brand new piece of chalk was hovering near the gray-black writing surface of the blackboard. It's writing something, Nigel screamed. The chalk is writing something, and indeed it was. What the blazes is this? Yelled Trunchbull. It has shaken her so much, her first name being written like that with an invisible hand. She dropped Wilfred on the floor. She yelled at nobody in particular. Who's doing this? Who's writing this? The chalk continued to write, Agatha, this is Magnus. Here's the so far, and there's the next couple pictures. So it says, everyone in the place heard the gasp from Trunchbull's throat. No, it can't be Magnus. It is Magnus, and you better believe it. Miss Honey at the other side of the room glanced swiftly at Matilda. The child was sitting very straight at her desk, her head held high and the mouth compressed and the eyes glittering like two stars. Agatha, give my Jenny back her house. For some reason, everyone now looked at the Trunchbull. The woman's face had turned white as snow, and her mouth was opening and shutting like a halibut out of water, giving out a series of strangled gasps. Give my Jenny her wages, give my Jenny the house, and get out of here. If you don't, I'll come and get you. I will come and get you, and I'll, like you got me. I am watching you, Agatha. And the chalk stopped writing. It hovered for a few months, and suddenly it dropped to the floor, and with a tinkle, it broke into two pieces. Wilford, who had managed to resume his seat in the front row, screamed, Miss Trunchbull is falling down! Miss Trunchbull is on the floor! This was the most sensational bit of news of the entire class jumped out of their seats to have a really good look. And there she was, the huge figure of the headmistress stretched full length on her back across the floor, out for the count. There's the pictures. Here's Trunchbull. And now she's fainted. Oh boy. Miss Honey ran toward her and knelt beside the prostrate giant. She's fainted, she cried. She's out cold. Somebody go and fetch the matron at once. 3 children ran out of the room. Nigel, always ready for action, leapt up and seized the big jug of water. My father says cold water is the best way to wake someone up who's fainted. He tipped the entire contents of the jug on Miss Trunchbull's head. No one, not even Miss Honey, protested. As for Matilda, she continued to sit motionless at her desk. She was feeling cautiously and curiously elated. She felt as though she had touched something that was not quite of this world, the highest point of the heavens, the farthest star. Up, she felt that most wonderful power surging up behind her eyes and gushing like warm fluid inside her skull, and her eyes had become scorching hot boxes, hotter than ever before. And things had come bursting out of her eye sockets, and then the piece of chalk had lifted itself and began to write. It seemed as there's the whole of Miss Trunchbull fainted and all the kids and the water. It seemed as though she had hardly done anything at all, and it was so simple. The school matron, followed by 5 teachers, 3 women, and 2 men, came rushing in. By golly, somebody floored her at last, cried one of the men, grinning. Congratulations, Miss Honey. Who threw the water over her? Asked the matron. I did, Nigel said, proudly. Good for you. Shall we get some more? Another teacher said. Stop it, the matron said. We must carry her up to the sick room. It took all 5 teachers and the matron to lift the enormous woman and stagger with her out of the room. Miss Honey said to the class, I think you'd all better go out to the playground and amuse yourselves until the next lesson. And then she turned and walked over to the blackboard and carefully wiped out all of the chalk writing. The children began filing out of the classroom, and Matilda started to go with them. But as she passed Miss Honey, she paused, and her twinkling eyes met the teacher's eyes, and Miss Honey ran forward and gave the tiny child a great big hug and a kiss. We're going to